strategy, the market strategy, and indeed the cultural strategy. This was a kind of long-term game. And in fact, the city culture was one way of accelerating progress against those longer-term strategies. So we've always been determined that we're going to make a long-term impact. What isn't determined is whether or not the organisation, the trust continues, and that has still got to be worked through. But what is clear is that the changes that those strategies have insisted upon will be delivered over a longer period of time. Additionally to that, the trust itself had built a business plan, a 5-year business plan, which is kind of unheard of in terms of a city of culture approach, because usually these are kind of set up temporary vehicles and they disappear again. And so we did establish a 5-year business plan, which actually we're only in year 3 of that. So even though we come to an end of City of Culture in May 2022, the organisation could decide to continue beyond that, and in fact has secured resources in order to do that. However, this is a really good and important moment for us to reflect on whether or not those priorities, the changes that were suggested all those time ago, are still relevant. Obviously, lots has changed in our world. COVID, the climate crisis is much more prevalent in all of our thinking, really. And of course, there are many opportunities in the city and region that we need to capture on above and beyond City of Culture. So what we've done in order to take this moment of reflection is take it seriously, because if I have a criticism of my colleagues in former cities of culture, is this has all been left far too late, and it's all been assumed that that we can just continue as we were, and actually in Londonderry and in Hull, there is very little tangible change that's happened in those cities. Hull's legacy piece, I guess the success that people point towards is the continuation of their volunteering program, which is fantastic. And, those who are engaged are having a great time, but actually the artistic community will bemoan very loudly about the lack of progress it's made. They remain very fragile as a sector. The local authority are not necessarily making smart decisions about investment in infrastructure to support artists. And so actually there hasn't been a cultural shift there. I mean, I saw yesterday Phil Redmond, who chairs the panel for the Cities of Culture. They're all in the city these 2 days as they're selecting the next City of Culture, and he's very clear that legacy happens over 15 years. And so it's a little unfair to judge Hull this early. However, the early indications are they left it too late, and they just assumed that business is normal, and we need to learn from that. So we have done. And so we brought in Stuart, who's with you today from Curium. And basically there's 2 phases to our work. And we've concluded the first phase, which is essentially a research and listening exercise. So numerous workshops, 100+ hours of face-to-face contact time Stuart had with multiple stakeholders, partners, artists, community groups, funders, naysayers and champions, included, so people who were kind of really concerned about what we were doing and people who were really advocates were involved in those conversations. And there's more than 750 pieces of evidence that have been gathered so far to understand what legacy means to people in Coventry, what they'd like to see from legacy. So we finished that first phase, and now that's the second phase we've started now, is really a bit more internal focused. So a board working group has been established, and they are looking at those pieces of evidence. They're using this to reflect on the existing business plan to see whether or not our strategic aims, our values, our priorities remain important, whether or not they're still pertinent. But also it's an opportunity for us to use that evidence to help refresh the other strategies in the city, particularly the cultural strategy. So that work is ongoing in parallel to this, because the intention is that anything that we devise as a trust needs to be in response to this refreshed new cultural strategy. Otherwise, we're working in a silo. And then finally, the piece of the work that we're doing around this is also considering what assets have been built up during this period. So whether that's about the relationships and networks, the convening power, the money that we've raised, and indeed any physical assets, including, of course, the digital gallery, which is a big project we're working on at the moment, and there has to be a management arrangement put into place for that. And in fact, the digital gallery could well be a catalyst for lots of other new activities in the city. So this process we're going through now is understanding what people think of what we've done, what they think legacy should look like, and then a refresh of what priorities the board established in the first place. So what we're anticipating is by November, end of November this year, we will have clarity around our priorities, clarity around our values, and indeed a working business model, a new business model, a structure to the company, an understanding of what that looks like in terms of team resources, and an understanding of what that means in terms of income sources that we'll gather. And that will be put into play. That company will start operating from June 2022, if indeed it is decided that there should be a continuation of the vehicle. And I do genuinely believe that there is an option which doesn't see the trust continue, because instead you disperse the resources and the expertise and the power elsewhere. And so it's not necessarily a given that we protect the charity that's been running the City of Culture piece. This isn't about job creation for the existing employees. We need to make sure it's right for the city going forward. So obviously, clearly, I've had a chance to reflect a bit on what I think legacy means for me as part of this process as well. And yes, while we can point to lots of good capital programs, public realm activity, shiny new spaces in the city, and also an enhanced reputation, great media coverage, all those sort of things. These are all really important. I still genuinely believe, and I think I said this at the last session I joined you, and I think legacy still comes from me from investment in people in Coventry. So whether that be from our apprentices, from our volunteer programme, from our sector development initiatives, our skills programme, providing platforms for seldom heard voices within our programme, and of course the leadership programme. I think this is where the true legacy will come from. And so certainly as part of the work that we're doing now, those are the areas that I'm certainly pushing for and advocating for, in terms of this is where the investment needs to continue to be placed, because I genuinely believe by us continuing to invest means that great people in the city will carry this forward long after these 2 or 3 years of the first legacy programme. So right now the challenge, I guess, is to galvanise all of our stakeholders around a revised vision. Everybody has a view, as you would imagine. Everybody has personal projects, but also everybody's under immense pressure. The public finances are absolutely decimated. And of course, there are a different set of priorities in the city in our post-COVID landscape. But we also need to make sure that we maintain momentum and we don't get stuck imagining what the future looks like. We absolutely have to push forward so we don't lose the pace that we've established. That is exactly what's happened in other cities who've had the title as well. And then finally, the trick, the task for us to do is to understand how we use the convening power that comes with City of Culture, the ability to knock doors, have phone conversations, direct access to government ministers. How do we maintain that within the city when the funfair leaves town? Because essentially, as I said, the panel are in the city right now. They're currently planning who will be the City of Culture 2025. All focus will go on that new city, and our job is to make sure that we continue to build bridges with those networks. But that can't be via me. It can't be via the senior management team at City of Culture. We need to make sure those relationships are embedded in the city so they are maintained long after our celebratory year is over. So I guess that's a quick overview of where we are in terms of the process and some of our priorities. And I'll take a breath there and take any responses and open up to some questions. Am you there?
Yeah, here. Just trying to also access the camera at the same time. Brilliant. So let's go on to gallery. If anyone's got a question, if you could either raise your hand or put it in the chat box. I know Josh has just unmuted, so I feel like a question awaits.
Can you hear me on my microphone? I think my headphones are trash, so you might not be able to hear me. I had a question, which was, have you thought about, in terms of like the convening power of City of Culture afterwards, have you thought about like names and stuff that you might continue, like an alternate version of the convening power on afterwards?
Do you want to unpack that a little bit more for me? In terms of names for what? Sorry, Josh. Hi, Josh. Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah. Can you do you want to explain that a little bit more, just in terms of what you think in terms of names? Just what do you refer to?
Like Coventry moves, etc.
I'm not sure if I understand the question, if I'm totally honest. Sorry to be unclear. And I guess when I talk about convening power, what I really mean is the ability to bring people together to deliver this piece, because there's an obligation from those partners to support what we're doing. And as I say, there's a risk that those partners then just coalesce around what comes next in the next city, whether that be Bradford or Southampton, and we lose all that. But also, you know, the truth is that most of those relationships are held by a very small group of people. So within the trust, we have direct relationships in with X, Y, and Z, and there's a risk that they dissipate. I guess some way that we've tried to avoid that is by putting producers into organisations, by developing sector development initiatives, but so that organisations have developed relationships, individuals develop relationships directly with funders, but there is a risk that the relationships are owned too much by the trust, and we need to make sure that we disperse those more effectively. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Sorry, my internet is terrible at this hotel, and I can't. My jack speaker isn't working, so I have to like go in here and then plug you in really fast to speak. So I probably won't contribute my best today. I know what I meant in my head, but I can type it out at some other point.
Yeah, send it through to me, and we can look at it. That's grand. Yeah, if you want to type it out and send it through to me, that'd be brilliant. Yeah. Hello, Ellie. You got your hand up. Yep.
Hi, morning.
Morning.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of carry on that a little bit, because obviously I work in the community, and I wondered whether you have any thoughts at this moment in time, other than the organisational representation, about, you know, direct community feed into what the trust might look like in the future, and what that proposed legacy is going to be.
Yeah, so I think Stuart can pick up in terms of what he's done in terms of the communication. So we ran 5 workshops as part of this process in various occasions around the city, and they were convened by our community connectors. 2 of them are convened by 2 of our community connectors, specifically to ensure that different voices were in that room. There's absolutely still scope for people to engage in this process, and there's also scope for community groups and individuals to engage with a cultural strategy refresh, which is probably more important, to be honest, because that will set the pathway for the city for the next 10 years, and the trust is responding to that. And so there will be a series of events over the autumn, which the City Council and the Cultural Compact leading to encourage feedback on the cultural strategy. So yeah, it's really important that community groups get involved in that strategy work, really.
Thanks.
Okay.
Anyone else? If you've got a question, you can put it in the chat box as well.
Grand. Okay. I suspect all the good stuff will come through the workshop that Stuart's going to be leading, and I genuinely mean it when now to say that the content that you create this afternoon will really influence where we head with it. So I'm really keen to hear about what you think should be the legacy for the leadership program. That's the first thing I really want to understand, because it's something that I would hope that there's something that we can do, but also what you believe is the next step for you, which can be supported via the legacy activity as well. So kind of on a personal individual basis as well, what do you want to get out of the next phase of City of Culture? We need to capture that. There's been a big commitment to you, but we want to maintain that commitment, and so we need to capture that today as well, so we can play that back into the board. Because as I said, I do genuinely believe that true legacy will come from investing in people in the city and continue to do that. So and you are clearly a really significant group in that. So yeah, do engage in that if you can. That'd be brilliant.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I think Corey has got a question. Corey, if you speak, we can hear you.
Hi, Corey.
Question on the how stakeholders selected that process. I know we, as a cohort, we only heard about it quite 8. I feel like it would have been kind of helpful for us, at least to attend early doors. I know there's initially you've got to commit that you would take over, but it would have felt like an opportunity to bring us.
Sorry, Corey, I missed most of that. I think I think I caught the start about how was the what was the process to select the stakeholders who are involved in the consultation? Is that the gist of the question? Yeah.
Yeah, and also just to add on, you know, we as a cohort, we only found out about it quite late. I think like within a couple of days of the third one, and it would have been, I think, best practice and insightful for both parties to be part of that conversation from the early outset, seeing as we've been part of, you know, some of the big talking events throughout this summer, Big Tent, for example, cultural summits and all. So I think it would have been an opportunity for us to be there at the start of this journey versus coming in.
Yeah, no, I hear that. I hear that. I mean, the reality is it's been pulled together with quite an urgency, quite a last minute nature, to be honest. I think you are in at the outset though, because we're you know, you were part of phase one, and obviously the work that you've been contributing towards has been captured part of our monitoring evaluation work, and so all of that feeds into this thinking. So the workshops were one aspect of it, but all the work, you know, the evaluation work that was done, the information that was captured as part of like the Big Tent Festival, so all of that feeds into this, our thinking around legacy. But I totally take your point, you know, that we could have done that with more advanced warning. Stakeholder is a good question too. I mean, clearly we start with our invested principal partners as a group of, you know, major institutions, anchor institutions, and I guess typically that's where you would stop. We absolutely haven't stopped there. You know, we absolutely opened it up as broadly as we can. But the reality is we won't have reached as many people as we want to reach. Consultation can go on and on and on, and I still think it remains open, and there will be opportunities to continue to refresh what the trust is doing, even after the business plan is established, because of course we will have to adapt to the conditions as we go forward. But I take your point. I absolutely take your point that we could have engaged you a bit earlier.
I think we've got a question in the chat box from Josh, who's put his comment, which you couldn't hear earlier in there.
Thanks, Josh. I mean, I still think that the narrative that should be promoted, and it's only a personal thing, is the notion of Coventry moves. This is the city where movement began. You know, boundless energy is this force that moves the city forward, two tones into one voice. These things are really, they remain important as far as I'm concerned in terms of where we're trying to push this forward. That acknowledges the city is not finished, will always evolve, will always change, will respond to challenges. Is not perfect, is challenged in lots of ways. And I think actually we shouldn't pretend the City of Culture has put this big glossy sheen and it's all been solved. You know, so I think the narrative around Coventry moves is probably still pertinent. Others may not like thinking of the language it shows, but I think the spirit of that, I think, is the one that we need to keep pushing as a narrative for the city. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. Oh, he's got a guest.
We can see you. Is there anyone else that wants to make any comments as well to what, not just questions, but any sort of immediate thoughts on what Martin said, what our focus could be as well?
Yeah, sorry, just one more from me, and sorry about my needy cat. It's just I spend a lot of time kind of thinking about and reflecting on how to really demonstrate the importance of creativity and the ability to interact with culture as part of people's journey into resilience on the foundation of obviously working with people who live in food poverty and other kind of complex and chaotic lifestyles and life situations. And I still feel that that's really quite a hard sell with some people, that that has a real true value and creates like connection and connectivity between people, and why that's important, and that why what we do is more than just about food. And I think I would really like to see kind of one of the legacy outcomes being that understanding is articulated. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. This is ridiculous. that understanding is articulated and better understood with like senior stakeholders, particularly people like the City Council and other funders who are generally speaking more kind of focused on like economic outcomes for individuals.
Yeah, I would echo that entirely. And one of our outcomes, or actually one of our aims at the Trust at the moment is about, yes, economic impact, but actually social health and wellbeing outcomes as well. And I think it becomes really, really important as we move forward into legacy phase. My ambition around this has always been that we influence all other policy areas within government and local authority. So all of our relationship is with DCMS, Department of Culture, Media, Sport, a little bit with Department of Housing, a little bit with Department of Environment. But I would go forward, hope that what we can do is make the case to education, health, transport, social care, international trade and development, about how you use culture as a tool for delivering against their agendas.
Yeah,
and I think we've started that. I mean, the fact that we've been able to gather money from multiple government departments to support City of Culture, which is unprecedented, suggests we've begun that, but we mustn't lose that as part of the legacy piece. So we definitely need to capture that as part of what you're doing this afternoon, because I think one of the critical things to go back to this convening power piece is how we continue to influence policy. And actually not be afraid to say, actually, we demand to be at the table because we have started this process already. We shouldn't just accept that we lose our convening power. We need to ensure that we're still, nudging our way into those conversations, because I think the prospects for long-term arts investment in the city are pretty poor, because of these other policy areas become a priority. So we need to ensure that we are embedding some sort of value of culture within other policy areas. Yeah, I agree with you entirely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got another question from Corey.
Just on the back of that, saying it's quite poor going forward into the structured arts, does that mean that the councils, the institutions that are already in the city are not fully aligned or fully focused with the vision of Coventry Move going forward?
No, I don't think it's that. I think it's the fact that they have got 50% less money than they had before, and there's a deliberate policy of austerity from central government. So I think, and they've got statutory services, in culture doesn't fall into statutory services unless it's kind of libraries and maintenance of museums. And so I think it's absolutely to do with deliberate policy from central government to not invest in local authorities. That's local authorities are always the first to be cut from central government, and any of this kind of new taxation that's coming in is not going to get anywhere near to plug the gap that has been left. It means the deliberate destruction of local authorities by central government. So it's so I absolutely don't think it's to do with a misalignment. And in fact, we met with the Director General of DCMS last week with Martin Reeves, and Martin Reeves from the City Council chairs a major kind of local government association. And he absolutely wants to work in partnership with DCMS to ensure that the status of local government and culture funding is elevated, but none of us have optimism around it. I mean, government are dismantling funding to the regions, and local authorities are the main conduit for that, and they've got no interest in supporting local government. It's absolutely a central government decision, which is why we have to continue to build a relationship with other funders and not rely on local government. It's why programs like this where you guys are absolutely flexing your entrepreneurial muscle, building new networks, campaigning for social justice. This is why this is important, because actually any over dependence on the local authority is just going to lead to disappointment, I suspect. So yeah, I'm not hopeful that local government can continue to support in the way that they have done. I mean, it's really interesting. The last 2 years across the country, local government investment in culture has gone up. But that's misleading, because what that really means is local authorities have stepped in to support buildings during the pandemic. And so they're maintaining their physical assets as opposed to investing in artists or communities. And so statistically, it looks like actually local authorities are on board, and therefore it might look like a bit of a dip. But actually, it was a response to the pandemic. And because they've had to do that, they will put further cuts into place. So this city is bucking the trend, but it's because we have this title. And so, go back to Ellie's point, we have to continue to make the case that culture matters across all policy areas, and not just be kept as a siloed budget, which is seen to be the easy way to cut, which is what happens in local authority. So I don't think there's a misalignment. I think it's just the reality of austerity, and people vote for a government, and the government said they would do this, and they're doing it. That's what's happened here. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm just going to come back on so we can see everyone. Okay. Has anyone else got any comments on that? But if not, we can afford some time back in people's diaries. And Martin, sorry. No. Has anyone else got any comments here? No? Right. Well, thank you so much, Martin, for speaking. I don't think you can see me. So there, I'll put myself back on.
You're very welcome. Thanks so much, everybody. If there's any other follow-up questions, don't hesitate to drop me a line directly. You've all got my email address, but certainly Tam can make sure you get that as well. But thanks for everything, and I hope to see you in person soon. Take care, everybody. Cheers. Bye. Bye.
So we did have a break plan from 10 to 10:15, but if we have a quick 10-15 minute break now, and then come back a little bit before 10 o'clock, actually, like 5 to 10. And then we can restart with Stuart and go into some breakout groups as well. So see you guys all at 5 minutes to 10. All right, bye.
Okay. So welcome everyone. I'm going to try my best to speak into the camera and address you guys on screen as well as speaking to the people in the room. So I'll try and turn and move as best I can, and sometimes I'll pick up on that camera and so on. I have met a few of you before at different events or on conversations like this over the phone. So, but just as an introduction, I'm Stu Bailey. I have been asked by Martin, the City Culture Trust, to write the legacy plan. And I say it's a massive we really, because I can't write any of this plan on my own. And so a huge amount of the collaboration we're going to talk about and the workshops we've run and how we got to this position is all about trying to facilitate and coordinate and collaborate on a legacy plan for the City of Culture. Quick bit of background, I'm married with 3 kids, 2 boys at high school, a little girl who is still at primary school. My wife and I have been married for about 15 years. We've been together for a lot longer than that. I'm from the north of England, as you can maybe imagine from my accent. I actually live in Wigan. Wigan and Coventry are connected. So in 1937, George Orwell was looking for a town to write about that was full of deprivation and low economy, low jobs, and not a great outlook. He came to Coventry, decided it wasn't bad enough, and came to Wigan and wrote about the road to Wigan Pier. So Wigan was too bad. Wigan was too bad, yes. And so we do have that connection. I'm about 5'6", so I actually don't look any bigger in the room than I look on the screen right now either. And so I'm going to take you through in this sort of section 2 parts really. One, I'm going to share with you some of the feedback, the stories, the words, the sentiment that we've heard and seen as we've been going round having all of the different conversations and workshops that we've been hosting. And then I'm also going to look to get your views, your opinions, your ideas on both what legacy means to you and also some of the suggestions on what things might we need to try and change if we're going to sustain and embed a number of key activities that has gone on in the last sort of 12 to 18 months. So there is a bit of work for you to do. How we're going to do that, we're going to break you guys on the phone out into a Zoom sort of room, and we'll then have a session in the room itself, and then both groups will come back together and we'll do a little bit of presentation, if that's okay. Now, I had a little game we were going to play in the room, but it's difficult and I can't play that game online. So instead, I'm going to show you a little video. So hopefully this video will come through from a sound perspective for all of you on the phone, and hopefully you'll all see it on the screen. And then I'll just explain a little bit about why I showed you this video in a second. So here we go.
Answer that question.
Let me
just 1 second, sorry.
hidden camera experiment to see if this woman would stand up at the sound of this tone, simply because everyone else is. You might be thinking you'd never go along with this. Or would you? After just 3 beeps, and without knowing why she's doing it, this woman is now conforming perfectly to the group. But what happens if we take the group away?
Elaine, please.
Okay, now she's alone. The crowd is gone and nobody is watching her except our hidden cameras. What do you think she'll do? She's now conforming to the rules of the group without them even being there. Now, watch what happens when we introduce another outsider who doesn't know the rules.
Have a seat and they'll be out in just a couple minutes. Great, thanks so much.
Everybody was doing it, so I thought I was supposed to.
Think she'll teach the new guy what to do? We kept the cameras rolling as more unsuspecting patients arrived. And slowly but surely, what began as a random rule for this woman has now become the social norm for everyone in this waiting room. To end.
Okay, that's better. Okay, so love that video, and there was a reason for sharing it. Okay, so those types of beeps that those people were standing up to, a lot of those beeps that we hear constantly are all around us. So they're rules, guidelines, they're things we follow because we know we have to. But there's also a lot of beeps that just go on that are things that we've created for ourselves. They're patterns, they're the way we walk to work, the same coffee that we buy every day. And what typically happens through social performance is when we see people doing things and we see the impact that those things can have, people start to copy. And so we have an amazing opportunity as part of Legacy to start to set some of those beeps, to start to create our own beeps through the city that other people can start to buy into, to start to copy, to start to change. Because whilst we're going to talk about infrastructure and funding and mechanisms and skills and knowledge, a key part of Legacy is going to be about behavioural change and how we get more people taking more responsibility for culture and for people around them. And so we're going to pull some of that apart in this session. We're going to try and work through some of that and understand a little bit more about what we think we can do to come up with some of those changes that will help in terms of Legacy. So
Things for ourselves and not just do stupid things because of the people that are doing them.
Great opportunity, Becky, definitely. So we're going to cover these types of things this morning. So we're going to do a little bit about what we've done. So I'm just going to build on what Martin shared in terms of some of the numbers and the people and the workshops that we've ran. I'm then going to give you some of the feedback, so the learning, what we've heard, what we've seen from different people, what the legacy meant to people. I'm going to get you to start to think about that as well. And then a little bit later, we'll look at, well, where should we focus? You know, where is the opportunity? Where are some of the ideas and possibilities to make this stuff stick? Okay, so what have we done? Well, we've tried to gather as many insights across the city as possible. So we went out and we spoke to a number of different groups, just building on what Corey asked about earlier. So yes, at the start, there was like a list of potential people to go talk to. There were loads of your sort of groups around the council and the universities and the West Midlands Growth Company and West Midlands Combined Authority and the council and so on. But that list quickly grew. And so including the conversations we've had, we have talked to all of those anchor institutions, but we've also talked to a whole range of the sort of cultural sector, from the Belgrade to 64 Million Artists to Coventry Dance to Flatpack to the Wildlife Trust. We also met with Love Coventry and the Curran City team, and we talked to all the producers from that team, and they connected us into the City Connectors. And so we met with them, and they then helped us with some of the workshops that I'll come on to in a second. We also met with a number of the sponsors, so DCMS, Spirit of 2012, the National Heritage Trust, the lottery funds, and those types of groups and companies that are investing money into this. So we feel like we've gone out and talked to as many people as we possibly could, recognizing that we couldn't talk to everyone, and there will be people we didn't get a chance to speak to. And so you know, we tried to get as long and as big a reach as we could. I'll come back to the workshops in a second. We then collated all the themes, you know, however, what people told us, what people said, what people thought. We collated all those themes. We put them into a bit of a playback pack, which is what you're going to see some of today. We started to share and socialise that pack with the City of Culture Legacy Trustee Board, who's now helping to prioritise what the trust should carry on looking at and should focus on over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, however long the period that determines. We're also looking, as part of the legacy plan, to develop some personas. So we want to use some of the stories that we've been told to tell the legacy plan story, not just have a series of facts and figures, but really try and bring it to life through the words of people of Coventry. And ultimately, I think by around about the end of September, we'll have a draft version of the plan, which will say, here's what we've heard and here's what we think the trustees can look at. And then by the end of November, we'll have put together what the trust could or should look like beyond the City of Culture in May next year. In terms of the workshops then, we ran these 5 workshops across the city. So we ran 3 in the city centre at Fargo Village, just downstairs from where we are, at the university campus and at the Belgrade. And then we went out into the community centres and we held one in the Muslim Centre in Foles Hill and one in the High Life Centre in Upper Stoke. And so those sessions were hosted by the community connectors, and they invited people from their local communities into the session to provide a different angle and a different perspective on what legacy meant to people. And as Martin said, we probably had about 750 bits of feedback all in all. And so that's where we started to consolidate all of that down into some of the themes that we're going to share and talk about in the next sort of section. And so, you know, these workshops were we tried to make them interactive. We tried to get people thinking a bit differently. So we played some games around with Jenga blocks to get people to think about what legacy could mean by building something out. And that just sparked some real imagination, some real creativity. We had things like Cov Henge being created out of blocks, and that translated into people wanting to see some real tangible assets left in the city that people would visit and come to and have stories about and really get engaged with and involved. We got people to create social media posts to say, as a community of people, what might you need from other people? So if you were putting a plea out on social media, what would that look like? What would you be asking for? What support would you need? And we tried to get people connected to each other. So the anchor institutions that I mentioned and the funders, the sponsors, we tried to introduce to the different charities and the different organisations so they could understand and listen to each other to say, well, what do we need from you? What could we do in terms of help and support? And so what have we learned? Well, we've learned these 5 things in particular. So from a legacy perspective, and we asked that question, what does legacy mean to you? The first thing, the big theme that came through is legacy means inclusivity. It has to be about a legacy for everyone, so that the voices that haven't been heard before, but are being made part of the conversation now, continue to be part of the conversation in the future. So legacy should focus on fair and equitable access to cultural resources and support. Well, we're going to come to that in a second. I'm going to ask you what it means to you, Becky. So hold that thought. So the second thing that legacy meant to people was it started to create this spark. You know, the city and the culture has created a real spirit, and it's really energized the city to get back into culture and get involved in culture. So we have to create that energy and keep that momentum going. We've talked about whether this isn't really a legacy plan, and is this actually a momentum plan to keep us moving forward. And I love that sort of analogy. You know, the city moves and where movement began moves again. It's just a really great metaphor for so many different things. So we have to create what is, yes, a rich history of Coventry and celebrate that, but also create something unique about this great diverse city. The third thing that people told us that legacy had to look at was it goes beyond 2021. You know, it can't just be that in May next year, everything packs up and leaves and all the ticker tape comes down and we don't talk about culture again. It was refreshing to hear Martin Reeves on Friday talk about we are committed as a council to culture and cultural activity and keeping the cultural vibe moving forward. And so we have to be able to do that. There was a quote that you might hear a couple of times today, but the quote that we received in one of the workshops was that this is a dress rehearsal. It's about the rest of our lives. It's not just about this year being fun and energetic. It's about what we do with that. So we need to create the opportunity for future generations to succeed. The fourth area is that a bit of a reminder in some ways that the cultural strategy of the city was documented in 2017. It's being refreshed right now. Culture Change Coventry is part of that refresh process along with the local council. And that plan currently takes us towards 2027. And of course, the idea is you'll never get to that end plan, because by the time you get towards that year, it will have moved on and the next 10 years will be put into practice and so on. However, we are on a trajectory. There is momentum towards that cultural strategy. And so we have to use this year as a springboard to get there faster and better. But there is importance in that because we have to be aligned to it. That we as a City of Culture Trust can't have a different legacy plan than that cultural strategy dictates, or that the Cultural Change Coventry Department team, is also looking at. We have to have some alignment to it. And unfortunately, from everything we've heard and you'll hear today, there is a real alignment to that. And then the final point, and again for me, came through so loudly and so clearly during the workshops that we ran, was that this has to be about a community feel. It has to be about people working together to create a legacy through effective partnerships, that we need to be able to bring people together to create those partnerships and to then network on and beyond that. And so what you've created is an amazing network of people already, and we need to be able to bring that network to other networks, and so we create communities within communities. And one of the things that the people of Coventry said was, if you give us the direction and you give us the tools, we'll get there. We'll do this stuff on culture. So help us to do it. Don't hinder us in that process. So that's what we heard. That's what we sort of captured from the question, what does legacy mean to people? So I'm going to ask, if that's okay now, for us to do a little breakout session. So I'm going to ask the team on the phone to go into a little breakout room. We're going to do some work around the flip chart in this room, and we're going to answer this question, what does legacy mean to you? So I'd like you to share that, to think about what it means to you individually, how we can progress with legacy, and then in around 10 minutes, we'll bring that back to the whole group and we'll play back what we've discussed as a group. Is that okay for everyone on the phone? Does that all make sense? And then we'll do a little bit of questions and answer and stuff on what I just shared as well, if that's okay. Great stuff. Okay, so Tam's just going to pop you into a room. I think you just go into it, and in 10 minutes we'll bring you back. And then for the rest of the group in the room, we'll go around the flip chart and do that. Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Well, welcome back. Sorry, I think we're just about sticking to time at the minute. So we're going to break back into groups now. So I'm going to pop you into another Zoom room, and we'll use another flip chart in here. And we'd like to use the next sort of 10 minutes or so to start to talk about the impact and the change that you'd like to see brought about in the city from within the legacy plan. So if you could, again, sort of work out who's going to talk or present it, or just chip in as you did before, and we'll present back in about 10 minutes time. And if you need to take a quick picture of the screen just to show you those 5 themes, then please feel free to do so. You will get this that slide as well afterwards, but just for the purpose of this activity. Yeah, we look forward to catching up in 10 minutes time. You've done it. So welcome back. Going to switch it around this time, if that's okay. So we're going to start with the team on the phone. So if you want to again present or talk through or share some ideas, we'll try and capture as much of them as we can, and if anyone in the room has any builds or questions, we can go from there. So who wants to kick us off on this second sort of round of discussion?
Well, we've just had an interesting discussion. I'm not necessarily sure we've answered the question.
Okay, no worries. Let's see. Let's hear what you got through.
Okay. Well, I'm just trying to think of the best way to articulate this. I think there's a definite sense that if we want things to be done differently, there's something about the quality and the style of leadership within the city that really needs to be different. And we were talking a lot about just making the same mistakes over and over again. So, for example, particularly in terms of lack of community voice, the lack of true quality, meaningful engagement with people at the grassroots level. And I was just giving the example of I used to work for the New Deal for Communities board, which was like a massive investment into a small area of the city, which had a huge board with huge commitments from partners. And there was definitely an aspiration to have young people and diverse voices at a board level, but the board just didn't operate in a way that facilitated that, because it had this very hierarchical business-like structure, and it didn't have that sort of receptivity. It was driven by the programme, not driven by a desire to truly sort of intertwine that programme with people's real lives and lived experiences and move at that rate. And there was loads of different reasons for that, and we kind of went into the fact that there's a lot of environmental factors that we could have absolutely zero, well, very, very minimal influence on, government policy and funders' requirements to meet certain outputs and outcomes that are not set by us. And so really, Nyasha was kind of saying that, well, I don't know, you say, Nyasha, you made a really good point about COV
well-meaning people
doing it ourselves, just being the movers.
There's something about it, just sort of popped into my head. It's almost like a devolution of power back to communities. So there's still this sense of, you know, or a reality of well-meaning people almost being this barrier. So they want to be the filter or the conduit through which engagement happens. And this sort of feeling of culture being done to people, like, here's culture, we're going to show you what it is, rather than actually you show us what it means. You actually show us what it means to you, and here's the resources and tools to do that. So yeah, it basically means that you end up making the same mistakes, despite the fact that you've got good intentions. And often, even when you're looking at organisations, as Ellie said, that bring in diverse voices, those voices can also often be forced to assimilate to the status quo anyway, because through, you know, good intentions, people still are they're in their comfortability, so they will only let through things that are still aligned with their personal agenda or funders' criterias. So it can become quite performative.
Oh, that game, that video you showed.
Yeah. It can
Because they're going up and everyone's doing the same thing.
Yeah, very true. Very true. I really like that. I think that point about we retain our own voice, it's a really powerful message. You know, it's not about just having one, but about being able to really have an influence and really utilize that without feeling like you have to change or conform to something different. Really powerful. Again, devolution of power, I think fits in terms of what we heard from the legacy collaboration workshops, where people were saying, hey, just give us the power, you know, let us take it. We'll absolutely deliver on all of these aspirations and goals if you help us, if you provide the tools and the support and the resources and the capacity to do so. So I think that's a really important point, you know, around how legacy could work. Any other builds from the phone?
There were a couple of other points. So Josh and Tyler were exploring this idea of it all being like a puzzle. Okay. Like so that, you know, like seeing us all as this, you know, as different pieces of a puzzle, and maybe kind of like creating some sort of visual map of what that looks like, I think, if I'm articulating that right. And we also, just another analogy, I think you mentioned this sort of idea of getting us as close to the table as possible. And we kind of explored the idea of just building a bigger table.
Yeah, really like that. For Josh, and in terms of that particular idea about the puzzle, if there's anything you want to, you know, if you're more into sort of drawing that out and demonstrating what that could look like, then, you know, again, please feel free to send anything across after the session as well. That'd be really good. Okay, are we okay to move on to the group in the room, or is that a hand up, or is that a sort of wave to a thumbs up? Okay, cool. Love it. Okay, so I'm just going to move this flip chart out of the way.
God, you can do it. Deep brain.
Okay, there you go.
So, hello. So in here we sort of had a discussion about the collaboration and bringing more people in and involving more people and more voices. But importantly, I think it's kind of, you know, what does involving more people in collaboration mean in terms of actual impact and influence? So people actually being empowered and seeing their contribution leading to actions, and it's not just an extractive, because just listening becomes an extractive exercise if you don't take action on that and don't see that being followed through. So yeah, it was conversations we had about the people attending and refreshing and keeping that group of people quite representative and refreshed, but also thinking about sort of goals and sort of long-term building long-term momentum. So the stimulus of the City of Culture is here, and how do we capture that energy and, you know, channel it to keep the momentum going? Something around, and then talking about the shared vision, that we still sort of need to be knowing what that is, and or building that together to be able to sort of come and you know, and bring that different contributions. I like your discussion around you know, like how you can bring lots of different voices together, but does that change things? And actually what we need to be looking at is, if we're doing things differently, is how the system is, and understanding that and changing the system, or enabling, you know, enabling growth in other areas, so the system is not kind of, you know, hogging up a particular way, hogging up all of the space and the resources. So kind of, for me, again, going back to my thinking around, you know, how do we create more space for things to grow, and that devolution, you know, kind of talking about that and building a bigger table. I think that building a bigger table with maybe extending the system slightly differently, I think maybe build more tables. So that's kind of a bit of that feedback. If I've missed anything, please chip in, and a bit of feedback back to what I've heard from you guys as well.
Wonderful, thank you, brilliant. Yes. Okay, so any questions or builds on anything that was just talked about in the room? Any comments or anything from the?
Can you dance?
Can I dance? Definitely not, no. I could dance badly, I suppose. Any views from or builds or questions or anything?
I would love to hear just a little bit more about like what we think that changing the system looks like from your perspective, like from the discussion that you were having, because I totally agree with you, but like what's our route in?
So one thing I would sort of share, and then I'll pass back to the room, is that we talked about that there's a lot of listening gone on in the last 12 months in particular. I'm sure there's probably a lot of listening gone on in the past in Coventry, and a lot of talking gone on as well. And certainly when we started doing a lot of the collaboration workshops, people told us, well, you asked us our opinion in 2017, you asked us again in 2020, you asked us again now. And so what we did talk about is, how do we make sure that listening and that talking turns into actual action, and the system is changed in that regard, where people have an influence over and almost take, I think we use the word empowered, and feel empowered to make decisions and to progress things forward, and have the ability and the knowledge and the confidence to do exactly that. And so maybe extending those tables, if you like, or creating new tables or a bigger table, is all about ensuring that the groups that are involved in the conversations have some tools, some resources, the right networks to get stuff done, and doesn't feel like they're just relying on someone else all of the time. I'm sure that happens and will still happen at times, but feel a bit more empowered. And so that was one of the sort of deals. But again, you know, any sort of builds or any other comments on that?
I think it feels like we just have a bit of a broken system. So instead of just adding to it, why not just destroy the rule book and just try something new? We have an opportunity to try something new in terms of how we approach activities, how we approach funding. There's a couple of people that spoke last week talk about doing these new ways of funding, which take out like the bureaucracy and the kind of the task or chore out of it. So I think it's working with the innovation to try and think smarter, which is going to be a little bit more progressive, because it doesn't work. The way that we're doing things, it just doesn't work. Who knows what the answer is? I think that's for us all to kind of work together and to try and define. But yeah, we're in a broken society who have dictated to us for so many years of how we should be doing things. It's time to flip that narrative and like we'll go back on it.
I think it's kind of like there's this, maybe there's always been this moment that, you know, certainly in terms of what I've kind of been thinking about and the conversations and spaces that keep sort of hearing similar things, is that there's like a system of like, you know, how we fund and how we do things, and we can either get good at that, at navigating that, at leveraging and taking advantage of it to, you know, to flex and bend and suit our kind of pursuits or goals or cause, whatever you want to find that. But that system also rejects a lot of people, and people don't have a choice. There's a level of kind of navigation and privilege to be able to, you know, leverage the advantage from that. And then there's the kind of, well, how do we do it our own way and be able to, you know, thrive and flourish? And I think that maybe some of the kind of more strategic kind of thinking is that there needs to be not a competition, but there needs to be a way of being able to distribute that resources so that there's good sort of access and opportunities. So that there's like thinking of it in an ecology perspective, but there's lots of different, so it's not just a dominating system, people just have to be good at it. I don't know if that made any sense at all.
It's taken out the classes and that whole class system, because it feels very much like that within the arts cultural world. You know, again, it's like elitist on the going to the theatre, going to the opera and all of that stuff, which is great, it can be great to visit if you can afford to get there. But if you don't, then you're missing out on maybe that spark that may be inside you as a 10-year-old kid who's never seen something. You just think, oh, wow, then you miss it. And then so it's trying to change that system and the mechanics of it all, because it's not suited for everyone.
There's also, can you guys still hear on that end? Does it sound okay? Just not okay, amazing. There's also a lot of other industries where access is been implemented far longer than this creative sector. So for example, just from the industries that I know, when you look at the wider participation sector in terms of university, it's about getting people into university. I'm not saying it's the best route anyway, but there's been a lot of work done in terms of access schemes, going to school, working with people on that. Whereas in the arts sector, there hasn't been that work. The same thing with law. You get a lot of big corporations as well that know they need to put their funding into those schemes, otherwise they're not going to be sustainable as organisations anymore, and they get actually knocked down from these like legal guides and trainees going to apply for them and all of these things. So they're actually marked down and not making those efforts, where again, our cultural institutions don't do that. And what that's done in the past, I want to say 10 years at least, I've seen it in the legal sector, where what it's done is created a lot of content creators and a lot of like smaller organisations that have come from that and done work on bridging that gap. And they've done work and being those spokespeople and creating that momentum that had started off with these like schemes or something like this, that they started off that way, but they've become into these like loads of different organisations. I'm talking stuff like Aspiring Solicitor, the stuff that I do as well, pro bono, and it's embedded into the culture of you have to do this to get people in. And it's still lots going on there, but they've got like 10, 15 years ahead of this sector. No one's been looking at this sector, but it's like, oh, everyone's lovely in the arts and cultural sector, aren't they? You know, everyone's really nice, but actually this is the most elitist sector out of every other one that I've come across. So it's how do we almost steal some of the models that work as well and look at them and be like, what's been done there that's actually really easy to implement? And then you've got people doing the work for you. You've got people being like, you know, grabbing, you know, the phone, making the video, making the TikTok and saying, look, I've been part of this event and that event, and this is how you can get onto this scheme and that scheme. And they're doing that work and they're becoming those leaders. But it's about allowing for that opportunity now.
Yeah, there's a huge amount about how that engagement follows action, follows further engagement, and you know, the word ecosystem is a good one, or ecology, and was a good one to use. One of the things that I'd encourage you to talk about or do this afternoon is think about some of the ways you can be more activist in this space. So how can you disrupt the typical way of thinking? How can you flip some of the ways that things have been done in the past? So funding models tend to work with someone has the money and they wait till a bid comes in and then they decide if they're going to award it. How could you flip something like that and make the person with the money responsible for going finding and stimulating the market in the right areas in order to be able to give money to people, not wait for them to ask for it? So try and, I'd encourage you to try and think maybe about how you could flip some of these ideas and be a bit more activist in that sort of way.
You be the change you want in the world.
You just get on with it, and that's what
Yeah.
happens. You literally just do it, but it comes at a cost.
Yeah.
Whether it's your health, time, whatever it is, it comes at a cost.
It's time to look after the people that are doing it. I think that's the care aspect of kind of that element of making sure people are not burned out and chewed up.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
You still got to.
Mel's session yesterday was a really good one, and you'll see that in the video, and you want to really watch it, because she talks about how to care for yourself through this whole process and the importance of that, because that's what you need. You can't have us saying, this is exactly what she said, you can't have us saying, come to the arts and culture sector, it's great here, but then we're all burnt out doing the work. Like, that is not okay.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's one to think about.
To consider, for sure. Can I just thank you for your time this morning in terms of the time you've invested both in just being here, but also in sharing ideas, sharing thoughts. It'll take me a couple of days to probably just write all this stuff up, put the slides back together, and then send some stuff out to you all. I'll probably actually send it through Tam, if that's okay. I'll send it through you and we can share it on. Again, if there's anyone wants to chat on a one-to-one about any particular ideas or further conversations, then please just do reach out. I'm more than happy to either do that when I'm back in Coventry one day, or do it by Zoom, probably is the quickest and best route. And again, any other ideas you may have, feel free to share them across.
Why are you saying thank you? I think we should also be saying thank you. Thank you as well.
It's like a personal cheerleader. I love that. And so, just as in terms of just a reminder that timelines, probably by the end of this month, we'll have something in terms of the start of the plan, which will feed back a lot of this activity and information. And then through the next month or two after that, we'll start to work on that trust model and what might that look like in the future. So thank you very much for the invite.
Amazing. I'm gonna stop it for now.